2, 1, ignition, liftoff.
Good evening, Mr. Vice President. This is Fred Capel calling from the Earth Station at Andover, Maine. The call is being relayed through our Telstar satellite, as I am sure you know. How do you hear me?
You're coming through nicely, Mr. Capel.
Well, that's wonderful.
July the 10th, 1962. Fred Capel of the AT&T Bell Laboratories and U.S. Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson hold the world's first ever telephone conversation transmitted by satellite. Telstar, which even inspired a hit record, was experimental, relaying transatlantic communications to amplifying stations on Earth for the first time.
Good evening, Europe. This is the North American continent live via AT&T Telstar, July 23rd, 1962.
The science of communication has come a very long way since those pioneering days. Arguably, that's especially true in the case of data transmission and computer sciences. We have, in fact, reached the point of no return because the global economy and virtually all the companies and services upon which we rely depend increasingly upon computers communicating with each other through systems like the Internet. What would happen if tomorrow, or in a not-too-distant future, people with political or criminal intentions were to bring down our most essential computer networks? This is no longer the stuff of science fiction. An attack on stored data and the means to exchange it can be every bit as damaging as one involving more traditional and violent means. Bytes are replacing bullets and bombs in the armories of terror and crime. A combination of all three might prove irresistible. The Internet has revolutionized computers and the communications upon which civilization depends like nothing before. The Internet provides anyone with access to a computer with a worldwide broadcasting capability, a way in which to disseminate information, and a medium for collaboration and interaction between individuals regardless of where they are in the world. The Internet, which has fueled demand for better and ever faster computers, has happened so quickly and spread so rapidly over the last few years that many people imagine it to be an invention of the last decade. Despite appearances, however, the Internet is already over 25 years old. In fact, its origins lie in the dark days of the Cold War. Back then, many went to bed in genuine fear that they might wake up to a nuclear winter if ever the balance of power got tilted as the big blocs, the United States, the Soviet Union and China, jockeyed for position and sought to spread their influences, ideals, and political and social philosophies. Back in the 1960s, military and governmental authorities in the United States decided to create a computer network that could survive a nuclear war and still allow strategic operations centers to communicate with one another. In 1967, the Department of Defense distributed a plan to connect 4 sites: UCLA, the Stanford Research Institute, the University of California at Santa Barbara, and the University of Nevada. The system was called ARPANET, Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. The 4 sites had computers that could communicate with each other, exchange scientific data, compare the results of experiments, and be programmed remotely. Alongside ARPANET, however, other networks were being created, mainly as messaging systems. Each had its own method of communicating, and in many cases, they were not compatible with each other. As ARPANET evolved, it became a main goal to allow communications to flow between the disparate computer systems, creating a group of interconnected networks, which became shortened to Internet. Information is the basic stuff of society, politics, and family life. Reduced to their essentials, all cultures are made up of information, complex sets of beliefs and ideas, exchanged between family members and the communities in which they live. The information revolution is reshaping everything. Information systems are becoming faster, more efficient, more interconnected, and this is having the most profound effects on almost every culture. It would seem, however, that our industrialized world has erected these immensely complicated structures on shaky foundations, and that poses huge risks, because the global economy is now totally dependent upon them working properly. With dependence comes vulnerability, and that could pose a very real threat to national security. In fact, it can pose a threat to our whole society. In today's electronic environment, the new enemies of the civilized world use laptop computers with satellite uplinks and heavily encrypted messages to liaise across frontiers with their global underground networks. There is no shortage of recipes for terrorists on the internet. Step-by-step cookbooks for hackers, crackers, and cyber terrorists. In an address to the US Naval Academy in 1998, President Clinton outlined the magnitude of the new electronic dangers. Even traditionally friendly nations have used their electronic skills to penetrate the systems of high-tech corporations and have stolen billions in proprietary secrets. Policing the streets is fine, but how can you police the information superhighway? Attacks using keyboards may not draw blood, but they can paralyze a nation's vital nerve centers. A keyboard may be less dramatic than a smoking gun, but it has already proved just as destructive. Information warfare specialists at the Pentagon, for example, are convinced that a properly prepared and well-coordinated attack by some 30 expert computer hackers strategically located around the world and with a budget of less than $10 million could bring the United States to its knees. In 1997, a team of specialists carried out an exercise designed to find out just how easy it would be to penetrate US cyber defenses and take control. Far too easy was their verdict.
Eligible receiver was intended to test our national ability to respond to cyber attacks. This was called a red team. 35 men were testing the vulnerabilities of our own systems within our Department of Defense. And they proved that they could have shut down a huge percentage of our electric power in the United States, as well as totally disable our command and control system in the Pacific. These 35 people were using tools that were available to anyone on the internet. They weren't using super weapons. These were tools that anyone can gain access to, such as Rootkit, Arbone, Satan, and these other tools. And there are currently 1,900 such sites on the internet that you can gain access to these tools and techniques. So this isn't a threat that is only for big nations. Anyone can engage in information warfare.
In the United States especially, attacks by hackers on federal agencies have grown dramatically. Internet users now number 120 million and rising fast. 70 million of them are in the United States. It's been estimated that by 2005, 1 billion people, that's 1 in 6 of the world population, will be online. A new website is opened every 4 seconds. The challenges to intelligence and law enforcement agencies grow at the same dizzying pace. At the beginning of the 1990s, a computer hard drive seized in a criminal investigation would contain some 50,000 pages of text. Now, police authorities may have to deal with up to 50 million pages. By coupling supercomputers, scientists have achieved speeds of 10 trillion operations per second. Today's latest desktop personal computers have the speed and storage capacity of yesterday's supercomputers. Logic bombs, Trojan horses, worms and viruses are the means by which enemies can take on a superpower no longer vulnerable to conventional weapons. But as the weapons change, so have the tactics.
I think that, yes, a strong attack is normally the best defense, but not in cyberspace. Why? Because many of our adversaries, they can go without electric power for days. The terrorists, they have a hard drive to lose. We have an entire country that's based on these insecure foundations. We have much more to lose and hence are much more vulnerable. So I'm more in the side of information assurance or information security. The defensive side in this case is much more important than the offensive side. Anyone can engage in this. You cannot deter. With nuclear weapons, deterrence was a very important factor in determining our policies. Unfortunately here, they may not be on our radar screen. It's not a small club. It's not an exclusive club. Everyone can engage, and we have much more to lose.
Washington, D.C. It's in this seat of power that most of the key decisions are taken. It's a city rich in landmarks familiar around the world. Among them is the J. Edgar Hoover building off Pennsylvania Avenue. It is, of course, the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI has featured in so many movies and TV shows that it's almost certainly the world's best-known law enforcement agency. First created in 1908, it came to prominence under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, who ran the Bureau from 1924 until his death in 1972. It was during the Prohibition period that the FBI came to the attention of the American people. This impressive collection of firearms seized by FBI agents is among the exhibits on display in a public part of the building, where a tour guide recounts the history of the Bureau and explains how the famous G-men ended the careers of some of the most famous criminals in the world.
He's perhaps the most notorious of all gangsters. John Dillinger was responsible for killing 10 people.
Here, there's a unique if grisly exhibit, the death mask of John Dillinger, once considered public enemy #1. Times have changed, so have crime-busting techniques. But as the tools for solving crime become more sophisticated, new kinds of crime present fresh challenges. The FBI today is still engaged in its role of combating organized crime, fraud, and espionage, but it is also spearheading the US government's determined battle against cybercrime. To this end, the NIPC has been set up, the National Infrastructure Protection Center, where all the major government agencies pool their knowledge and resources to work together in an effort coordinated by the FBI. Foreign governments have representatives here, so does the private sector. Cooperation now may help forestall a damaging attack launched electronically.
The fact that all these different infrastructures are interrelated and interconnected, if one hacker is able to take down Wall Street, what would be the effects of that on our economy, on our daily operations of the United States? We just don't know. If hackers somehow could manage to wipe out all the records of all the last year's trading on the stock market. You know, what effect would that have on, if hackers were able to bring down the power grid at will? You know, how would that affect us? If hackers were able to hack in and get control of the air traffic control system.
It's not hard to imagine the effect if terrorists disabled air traffic control systems or interfered with information on aeroplane movements, but that's not the only risk. Nuclear power plants might also be vulnerable. Cyber attacks could also be launched against the emergency services or against public utilities like gas, electricity, or water. Even hospitals could be targeted. In the post-superpower age, it's impossible to predict what the target might be, when it might be hit, or indeed, who may launch an attack.
The anonymity of cyberspace is very important here. You don't know who's on the clickety-clack of the keyboard. Who's breaking into my system? Is it a kid? Is it a foreign intelligence service? Is it a competitor for economic espionage? You don't know when it's occurring, and it takes days to do robust investigations to identify the perpetrators. That, to me, is an important gap that needs to be filled in terms of intelligence and law enforcement. We do not have any capabilities to provide warning of attacks now, nor do we know who they are. And as we speak now, there are also big attacks on our Pentagon. And again, we don't know who it is. So do we respond militarily? It's anonymous. It's invisible. You don't see it. So we don't know. We don't know if this is actually an aggressor with hostile intent or whether it's a kid. And I think that that's something, in my eyes, that's the biggest concern about cyberspace. It's this global village, no police department, and bottom line is we don't know who it is. It's made for proxy warfare.
The new tools of information technology can blend fact and fiction in ways not easily discernible to decision makers. The internet can also serve as a global superhighway for disinformation. With the need for ever faster decisions in the highly competitive world of commerce, there's a danger that those decisions may be based on false information. Just as pilots, astronauts, special agents, and even mercenaries must undergo training, so hackers and crackers can be turned into a worldwide network united in a political or criminal goal. That goal may be, as it was for the Supreme Truth Cult in Japan, when it launched a sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway in 1995, nothing less than the total collapse of world capitalism. More and more net watchers are seeing groups of political activists, extremists, and even terrorist organizations with their own websites, from the Marxist or Maoist left to the neo-Nazi far right. This way they can keep in contact with like-minded people around the world in a process that sidesteps whatever legal measures their governments may have in force to contain or curtail their activities.
To date, we've only had one confirmed terrorist group deny service, and that was the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, who disabled command and control systems of U.S. embassy communications. But that's the first. That's a harbinger of what you're going to see a lot more of. And a number of other terrorist organizations have a presence on the net. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Shining Path. By and large, though, they are using their web pages for fundraising, for recruiting, for propaganda, much of it disinformation, and for alliances of convenience. But that's how they use it as a tool. You're also seeing a number of terrorist organizations, though, who see our dependency and will look at it as a weapon. And that's what I'm most concerned about.
For those with political aims that are well outside the mainstream, the internet provides the opportunity to incite hatred, publish propaganda, and to give slogans to followers. But for terrorists, information warfare is by no means the only option open to them. They can cause far more damage than that. For the truly dedicated group prepared to take concerted action to achieve their goal, the tactics available to them online can be terrifying to contemplate, augmenting and making worse the headline-grabbing horror of violent direct action.
Information warfare may not be the ultimate means. If you're a terrorist, you don't want to abandon the bomb. The bomb gets headlines. The target's not the hundreds killed, but the many thousands and millions watching it on TV. That's the target of the terrorist. Now imagine if you have a terrorist who uses the bomb and then uses information warfare to disrupt emergency 911 communications. So your policemen, your firemen, your EMTs can't respond to the crisis. That enhances the lethality by many times. So it's a multiplier. It augments the aggressor and makes him many times more lethal. That, in my eyes, is the ultimate concern.
Security is no longer defined by well-trained, well-equipped armies standing between the aggressor and the homeland. The weapons of information warfare can outflank and circumvent military organizations and compromise the communications and technology upon which both military and civilian infrastructures depend. In this case, the enemy is not even in the line of fire. The battlefield has shifted from the place where military operations determine the winner. It's now an electronic battlefield where a lone operator can cause as much damage as a whole battalion. Virtual corporations, cashless electronic transactions, and economies based on just-in-time deliveries make our entire commercial and industrial sector vulnerable to a cyber attack that could be just as damaging as an attack on actual materials stores. It's an enormous challenge for law enforcement agencies like the FBI, who find themselves struggling to keep up with criminals who've adapted to the new communications medium, where they find it easier than ever to carry out crimes that, in other forms and by other means, are only too familiar.
Computer-facilitated crimes are just like the same violations that we see on the telephone, for internet fraud, telemarketing fraud, things like that. We're seeing them in the internet arena. They're using them right now. We see it in everything that we're doing. We see it in financial institution fraud, FIF, for online banking and check fraud. We see it in government and healthcare fraud. In addition to that, we see advanced fee schemes, Ponzi schemes. We even see intellectual property crimes where they're stealing software, music, and film. Also, the Internet Fraud Watch developed 6 types of major frauds that they're reported. Here's what they are: web auctions, general merchandise frauds, internet services, computer equipment software, pyramid money laundering schemes, business opportunities, work-at-home plans, advance fee, credit card repair, credit card issuing. Now, these type of frauds that we're seeing over the internet, the same stuff that we've seen in wire frauds where people call them and victimize people, it's just we're seeing it over the internet now.
New York City. For a lot of people here, life's pretty good, and there can be few more exciting cities in which to enjoy the affluence the age of electronic communications has brought them. Of the 30 million American households online, nearly 1 in 3 trawl the internet for advice on investments or to research securities they're thinking about buying. According to a recent survey, around 3 million internet users in the US have online trading accounts, and that number is expected to rise to 14 million within the next 3 years. And wherever honest citizens are prepared to part with their hard-earned cash, there are always those who are going to try to ensure they never see it again. Not so long ago, most security trading was done on the floor of a stock exchange. Conning investors then was hard work. Most stock frauds involve micro-cap stocks, small, mainly start-up companies, or other securities no one has heard of. For con artists working the traditional way, it meant hours hunched over telephones making calls. Today, a single email or website can reach millions of potential investors anywhere in the world, instantly, effortlessly, and with a greatly diminished chance of being caught. And there are so many options open to the enterprising crook. With a convincing website, a clever confidence trickster can, for instance, artificially boost the value of a stock he or she has bought, offloading it later at a massive profit and leaving hapless investors wondering why their rosy-looking investment went pear-shaped. It's called pump and dump, and it's the same method used by crooked dealers in London in the 18th century, selling worthless shares in the famous South Sea bubble scam. It's been done many times since. The actual scams then haven't changed. But with the internet, criminals and con artists can reach millions of hopeful investors without lurking in Exchange Alley for likely-looking victims. Any crooked investment advice can now be played to a much bigger audience, and the speed demanded for decisions makes a crook's task easier.
If you take, for example, the example that I gave on the Internet Fraud Watch Group, you went from 1,000, roughly 1,200 complaints in '97 to about 7,500 in '98. So that's roughly an increase of about 500 or 600%. And I think you're going to continue to see that because the Internet is much easier to get to now. And unfortunately, because that's the case, you're going to have criminals that are going to take advantage of that, and they're going to use that wonderful tool as also a tool to identify and victimize people.
For most of us, the internet is just a handy means of communication, information, or entertainment. But for an unknown number of criminals, it's the goose that keeps laying golden eggs. It's cheap, and it allows a crook to set up a website on which he can advertise his wares. This is the Security and Exchange Commission in Washington, a watchdog organization that tries to spot and close down fraudulent investment websites.
There's a type of fraud called touting. Touting means that someone is saying something positive and very affirming or good about a particular company, and they're not disclosing to the public that they're being compensated, how much they're being compensated, and in what form. They might be receiving cash, they might be receiving stock. There are many other types. There's just straight lying. There are companies that don't even exist. They're shell companies. And there are people on the internet who say, this is a great company, they have great products, and boy, you should buy this company. And then people, without doing the right amount of research and asking the tough questions before they take their money and buy that stock, just hand it over and they lose it all. So something like that is just outright lying. So those are two types of fraud that we see on the internet on a daily basis.
As night approaches in the city, people may be wary of being mugged out in the open, but in their own homes or offices they feel relatively safe, yet that is where the cyber cheats are most active. So seriously is the problem being taken among ordinary investors that a new breed of vigilante has sprung up. These people, organized and in contact with each other, nightly scour the internet for dubious sites. Once they've established that a scam is being perpetrated, they inform the Security and Exchange Commission. This is one kind of vigilante the authorities are keen to encourage.
We have limited resources here at the Securities and Exchange Commission. So it's very important for us to take any number of actions that we bring and publicize them very widely through the news media. And the goal is to leverage our limited resources against cases that we bring to get the most attention and to educate as many people as we can about the dangers of fraud on the internet.
A whole generation has grown up for whom computer technology is just an ordinary part of everyday life. Internet connections, web cameras, surfing and hacking hold no terrors for them. This is the generation that grew up on computer games, zapping aliens, exploring virtual landscapes, and boldly going into strange new worlds in the safety of their bedrooms. For them, the internet is a source both of amusement and of utility, providing speedy communications on a global basis, whilst offering endless possibilities in terms of entertainment. But for some, the biggest buzz comes from taking on the major players and causing discomfort, annoyance, or worse. The line between hacking pranksters and professional criminals or terrorists is hard to draw. Recent events have shown the trend: cyber attacks and denial of service attacks on popular websites run by such famous names as Yahoo, CNN, Amazon.com, and a whole host of others. A new breed of criminals operating across national boundaries and with high-tech weaponry has arrived. Highly skilled hackers are being recruited by criminal organizations to take part in their operations on a worldwide basis. Law enforcement, on the other hand, is often constrained by barriers, national and otherwise, that simply don't exist in cyberspace.
Many of the infrastructures that are critical to our economic and national security are not owned by the federal government. They're owned in the private sector. So we need to build this partnership or alliance with those private sector entities by which to share information on their vulnerabilities, so that we can also provide that information to the other people in other sectors or within the same sector that these individuals operate in, so that they can provide this kind of protection and prevention of events in the future.
For societies in the developed world, the police exist to protect the public and deter the wrongdoer. But it's one thing to chase after criminals fleeing the scene of a crime by car. Catching those fleeing through cyberspace is an altogether different proposition. In this computer-dependent age, bank robberies by armed men or safecrackers may become a thing of the past. Today's bank robber doesn't need a stocking mask, a fast getaway car, gel-ignite or a sawn-off shotgun. All he needs is a computer, an internet connection, and the skill to use them.
There's an old saying in the U.S., and there's an old bank robber, the most infamous of all time, named Willie Sutton. And when asked, why do you rob banks? His answer couldn't have been more direct. That's where the money is. And as electronic commerce continues to go online, it's safe to assume that crime will continue. And in most cases, the criminals are further along than the good guys. And we're a number of years behind the power curve, legally and otherwise.
In fact, it's been estimated that in the United States, the electronic capabilities of law enforcement agencies are lagging some 5 to 10 years behind those of international crime syndicates. For instance, it's believed some 10,000 high-powered communications scanners are smuggled in from Asia every month. They allow crooks to intercept and record the mobile phones, faxes, and even landline communications of the forces of law. They're also used by organized crime to steal proprietary secrets from high-tech companies. As a result, computer crime detectives following a trail through cyberspace often find themselves being followed by the very criminals they themselves are in the act of pursuing. If the police and enforcement bodies are finding it hard to keep up with the pace of technological change, it becomes more important than ever that the public, especially those investing money over the internet, exercise rather more vigilance than they have up to now.
A website can be very inexpensive to create. So you could be a company that is just a shell company, doesn't even really exist, or maybe it's just getting started. And you can have a very handsome website that looks believable and says all sorts of nice things. And you could compare that to a Fortune 500 company, Mercedes-Benz, Daimler Chrysler, or GM, or Pfizer, or any number of established legitimate companies. And on the computer, they look almost equal, but one is real and one is fake. And people just need to stop and think before they hand over their money. We can never say that enough.
But it's not just those who risk their money on internet investments who are at risk. Banking has developed a massive dependency on computers and data transmission. The amount you draw out is stored as a memory, along with many other personal details of you and your life. The advent of online banking services is just the latest development. Banks retain a vast amount of personal information about their customers, and all their account records and credit card details are held on file. Questions have been raised as to just how secure that data is. How easy would it be for a dedicated hacker to get into your bank's computer system, find out about your credit rating, your debts, the standing orders you pay, and perhaps change a few details or take your money? This man thinks it's far too easy, and he's hacked his way into bank records to prove his point that security must be tightened.
I have already tried the last years to make a company know that they have to be really careful with private information, because the word privacy is going to go away, because everything is stored on the system, and if the system is not protected anymore, there is no privacy anymore. So what I have done 3 big hacks in Belgium to show the companies and to show the normal people of the street that there are really big problems, and that we have to think about, and that we have to say, okay, stop, and just look back what we have made, and let's think how we can make it better before we just growing.
This is the bank whose records Frans de Vara claims to have hacked, although he points out that he did no snooping while he was there. Bank officials are not convinced that his mission was successful, nor that their data security is lacking.
We think he did it more for his own promotion than to hack the bank. He got only at the front door, and he couldn't get into the main door. So then he shouted very loud, "I managed to ring the bell at the front door." And he couldn't go any further. No harm was done. He didn't steal money. He didn't see any figures. But even more, when we look at the statistics in this period, when the newspapers were full of those articles, we see that the number of transactions kept on growing. That means our customers were not very much impressed by the activities of this man.
However serious or otherwise this example of hacking really was, it highlights risks none of us can afford to ignore. Hackers will go on trying, and there is no such thing as completely unbreachable security.
I have shown that it's possible to go inside the information, see how many money some guys has, what payments they have to do, and all those things. I have go quite deep inside the system, and Plant Internet I have to take over the complete control of the system. So at Plant Internet I could do everything. If you just can imagine what you would like to do with the system. I could make myself a couple of millions and make myself richer, but my only intentions was to show there was problems. So I just have to go into the system, make a nice document about where the problems are in the system, how I have to go in, and put it on the media and give it to the company who has hacked.
Banks and other organizations that retain high levels of personal data continue to update their security systems with the aim of creating firewalls that keep hackers at bay. And since the hackers keep improving their skills and the tools they use to gain access, so those with data to protect must strive to keep ahead of the game with new ideas and equipment.
For the future, the other main we're going to use to secure our transaction is the chip. Every customer has a bank card to get money from the ATM or to pay in a POS machine in a shop. And we will use the same technology to access the internet. We insert a card, the card reader will read what's in your chip, and with your PIN code, it will transfer the required data towards the mainframe, so that the mainframe can identify, yes, this is a valid transaction, or no, you keep out, you're not allowed to enter.
Whatever measures banks employ, hackers try to circumvent them. Even those doing it for fun keep in touch with each other through the internet, a secret brotherhood of those who enjoy causing companies inconvenience and making life difficult. Even pranks can prove expensive, ultimately costing jobs in the companies they target. Companies are increasingly vulnerable to attack from those who can't resist leaving a calling card, like graffiti on a factory wall, to show they got in. This in turn has led to the emergence of companies which specialize in building protective measures to keep hackers out. It's a growth industry, and it involves round-the-clock research. The information that hackers may gain access to is not just market sensitive. It may also be important to the workings of society at large. Keeping it safe is a matter of widespread concern.
We've said for a long time we went from the industrial age to the information age. Well, maybe that is true, but we will truly, in my mind, see what information age means at the time, and this is from now forward, at the time that information becomes the value of the company. Yeah? As soon as we have transformed most of our assets into electronic assets, if that is what we have to protect, I think you will see different levels of warfare among companies. Yeah. If your assets are purely electronic and somebody can breach your walls, can destroy, steal, compromise in any way your assets, for that company that could be a holocaust. Yes. Yeah. It's part and parcel of the new age.
Organized crime groups are prepared to pay expert hackers a lot of money and provide them with the latest and costliest equipment to hack into big companies, banks, and government departments. No system stays inviolable for long, so new and ever more sophisticated means have to be developed to stay at least half a step ahead of the crooks. And that's what anti-hacking specialists are trying to do.
Actually, you're simulating what hackers do. Yeah, and you know then, does this work or doesn't it work? So that's scanning. The other part, intrusion detection, is the same as having sensors all over your house. Yeah? You can have a video camera outside, you can have video infrared cameras inside, you can have smoke detectors, you can have all these things which actually protect you dynamically, actively against anything that could happen in your house at any one time. And these two technologies, like scanning and intrusion detection, are fairly new and are also part of securing an e-business environment.
Hackers sometimes use innocent computer users in their attacks by sending hidden messages that cause their computers to log on to the targeted website all at the same time, overloading it and forcing it out of action. It's something internet service providers are well aware of, but find it very hard to prevent.
Denial of service attacks use illegal traffic on the internet, so it's very, very difficult to prevent this kind of attack. And we will have to find new ways to configure the networks and to use the network equipment to prevent this type of attack. But it's a very serious problem for every service provider in the world for the moment. And the only way to prevent this type of attack at the moment is that everyone has to tighten the security of his own computer when going to the internet. That's very important. So the security must go down to the end user, not only the service provider.
For those who provide sites, the webmasters as they're called, attacks by hackers are also a major headache. By definition, websites must be accessible. The webmaster's task is to provide integrity of service, protect against illegal access and hijacking of the site, and to enable the site owner to update information. It is possible to provide a level of protection against denial of service attacks, but it's not easy.
The intention now, and that's also the feeling in the whole of the internet community, is to keep that reaction time as short as possible. So the warning signs that something is happening, to put them as early as possible. But even then, there is still the remote, although very slight possibility that somebody eventually might get in. The name of the game is to make the obstacle or the threshold for him to pass and eventually to get in so enormous that he just abandons about it, that he forgets about it.
One line of research in the fight to control access is what's called biometric authentication, a system by which access will only be given to those who fulfill certain physical characteristics known to the host computer. Number codes can be cracked, but duplicating a fingerprint or retina scan may prove harder.
Technologically, the devices are getting portable, are getting usable. You can have them sized less than even this mobile phone. You can even have them at the size of the dongle of such a mobile phone. You can build them into keyboards. You can have them built in almost any device you want. It does not have to be actually even an IT device. It can be a door lock. And with the interconnection of even those captors, those sensors at a door lock with a server, when somebody is presenting himself to a access, he has to verify either by voice, finger or eye scan or whatever other means which will come in the next future, and that will then be authenticated to his body.
Another kind of internet crime is child pornography. Paedophiles, who might have been nervous about obtaining printed material, can freely access a large number of sites, some involving children as young as 2. There are even interactive sites over which children are abused to order. In a survey, 4 out of every 1,000 internet users in the Netherlands, for instance, have accessed paedophile sites, many of which are based in Russia, out of reach of Western law. In the West, a growing number of households own computers, and children are very adept at using them. They're a useful means of finding out information on hobbies, interests or schoolwork. There are thousands of games to be played, but there are also dangers. In the many chat rooms, for instance, where children exchange information, it's impossible to tell if the person your child is talking to really is another child, or a paedophile seeking contact, information, perhaps an address and a photograph, or even a meeting. It's an issue being taken very seriously by the FBI. At this office in Maryland, Operation Innocent Images tries to root out the perverts who prey on children. Their activities have led to a number of arrests, many of them of Europeans, who traveled to the United States in the expectation of indulging in sex with a child. This office is manned in shifts around the clock.
Basically, what it amounts to is we have agents who are online choosing profiles of young boys and girls who go into predicated chat rooms. These are areas that we have knowledge that individuals will go there looking to meet young children. We go there posing as young boys or young girls, and we get contacted by these individuals who express an interest in having sex, and when they travel to a pre-arranged location, they're arrested and charged federally. The success rate has been phenomenal since 1995, and the fact that we have executed many, many search warrants, and the individuals that have been convicted, we're running approximately a 99% conviction rate, which goes to show you that the evidence is very substantial.
According to experts, the biggest danger comes when children are left alone to amuse themselves at the computer.
Pedophiles do contact our children. Parents should be encouraged to teach their children to use the internet for something other than chat rooms. Children should never, ever give out personal information on the internet to anybody that they don't absolutely know. Because the individual that they're giving their phone number to or sending a photograph or their address could be a pedophile. a person that says they're 13 or 14-year-old, could be 50-year-old male or whatever. People have to realize that the individual who's doing this is not what we would typify as a child molester or somebody with a big nose and a dark raincoat and dark glasses. These are people that live in our neighborhoods.
In the space of little over a decade, Western society has come to rely on computer communication. It affects everything, from the way our factories work to the stocks held in our shops, from the emergency services to the commerce on which the world's prosperity depends. But if the systems we count on are vulnerable to attack by pranksters, but also by criminals, terrorists, and unfriendly powers, then so are our nuclear plants, our hospitals, banks and schools. In cyberspace, normal rules don't apply. But attacks launched there for whatever reason could resonate in the real world in such a way as to change our lives forever. This is one computer game we can't afford to lose.